And a warm welcome. You're joining us at Hydepark on AdaDerana 24. Tonight we talk about the year ahead, reforms expected in Sri Lanka going forward and where we stand as of today, as the IMF has signalled a preliminary deal with Sri Lanka for bailout arrangements. An interim budget is presented and Sri Lanka plans to look ahead with a host of reforms introduced or not. We'll talk about all this, but before that, I've invited a panel to discuss the topic. We have with us tax experts, accountants, chartered accountants as well joining us here. Firstly, Mr. N.R.Gajendran, Senior Partner for Gajma and Company. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
We also have Mr. Sujeewa Mudalige, Managing Partner for PwC in Sri Lanka. A very warm welcome to you too. Mr. Suresh Perera, Principal for KPMG in Sri Lanka, Tax and Regulatory Matters. A warm welcome to you too.
Thank you.
So first, before we talk about the host, whether there are reforms brought about or whether there are areas that the government, the Ranil Wickremesinghe-led government has missed. I'd like to find out what you think about this budget at a time when we've been talking about a number of reforms that the IMF too demands that Sri Lanka adhere to, while there is a significant dearth in foreign exchange and currency dearth in the country.
So
yes, we'll
before
start off with you.
We come into those details, Indeewari now just look at the state of affairs of the country at the moment, the predicament of the country and the people. Basically say you had 100,000 rupees before all this crisis and catastrophes took place. Say your father has given you 100,000 rupees. It was in the bank. It was worth 100,000. After all this mess that has taken place, two things are hitting us: unlegislated tax and legislated tax. Unlegislated tax, the inflation, right? The rise in prices and all. Other one is legislated tax. You have income tax and indirect taxes. That 100,000 that was worth before, if it just lies in the bank even now, it's halved. The measurement there I'm taking the exchange rate, because we are an importing country. We were at about 180 rupees before, and almost dramatically and momentarily it came down. Now we are 360, 340. So 50%, 100% depreciated. So your 100,000 and the buying inflation is now at 68%. So that 100,000 is now worth half, right? Now say if someone made you made an income of 100,000 before all these things happened, and you are not liable for income tax, and you used this money for consumption, you would have, of the 100,000, you would have paid 8 rupees, right? And you would have had 92 rupees or 92,000 worth of money. Now this 100,000 is worth 50, and now you don't pay 8 rupees consumption tax, you are going to pay 15 plus 2.5, almost 18%. So you come down to 50 minus 18, 32. So earlier you were at 92, now 32. A person who doesn't have any income, his value of rupee in purchasing power in any sense has gone down 2/3. It has almost come to 1/3. Now if you take a person who is paying tax and using this 100,000 rupees consumption, and if you see this 100,000 rupees, say he's going to pay at the highest rate, say now over 10.2 million, you go to 32% from October, and after October you are going to have 15% VAT, and also you will have Save the Nation contribution 2.5%. Now this 100,000 what he had before, if he had 100,000 before, he would have paid 18% income tax and 8% VAT, so 26. So he would have had 76,000 rupees worth of real money at his disposal. But now if you take the same guy getting 100,000, he will pay income taxes 32, and the value, property 100, the value has become non-tax enacted legislation, inflation have brought it from 100 to 50. Out of the 100, he'll pay 32. So he will have 18 balance. 50 minus 32 is 18. Now, when you take the indirect tax and of 15 and almost 18, virtually he has nothing. So this is the predicament we have, whether we have realized it, whether it's person who is paying tax or no tax, he is being affected by legislated tax and unlegislated tax.
But so isn't this what we need? We've been talking for a long time that we need to bring attract more and more into the tax net. Isn't this what you yourselves have been calling for a long time?
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me today, Indeewari. So I think again, just to give a little bit of context, I mean, if you look at President Wickremesinghe's position today, see, he has to present a budget when everything is against him. So if you just look at a high level, right, we have said we are a bankrupt nation. IMF has said our debt is not sustainable. Our interest rate today in Indeewari on a one-year deposit on a treasury bill is 30%. Inflation is 60% and food is 80%, right? And as you said, our revenues are so low in the country. Government is not collecting taxes, right? And our exchange rate has gone down by 80%, 200 to 360. So if when you are asked to present a budget under those circumstances, it's not an easy task. I mean, it's an extremely difficult task. So what he has presented, we'll get into it in detail. I have certain things which I am fully supportive of, and certain things I don't think is the right thing to do at this moment of time. To answer your question directly is on the revenue side, yes, we need more revenue. We see this year we are collecting only about 8% as our revenue compared to our GDP, right? Developed world will do anything up to 40%. And the developing countries, anything from about 20 to 30%. And we are one of the lowest at 8%, right? But at the same time, over the last so many years, politicians have inculcated this sort of mindset, right? It's an entitlement culture. From the day you're born, either the state has to give it to you free or either at a discount or rebate, right? So that's what we expect, and that's the populist policies that these politicians have been talking about, you know, for a long period of time. So you're right, we need to increase revenue, but I don't think, see, in my view, if you ask me one thing that they have missed out in this budget, I think it's on VAT. I am against the rate going up, right? At 12% is a reasonable rate. What needs to be done is we need to broaden the base. How do you broaden the base? We have given numerous exemptions on VAT. In a nutshell, I would expect only health and education to be excluded. Health and education, no VAT. Everything else, in my view, needs to be brought within the VAT sort of bracket, number one. Number two, the threshold has to come down. So what happened 2 years ago was this threshold was increased substantially, right? So with that, most of the people got out from the, you're no longer liable for VAT. So now what are we doing? We have a small number, you know, of where you are within that that bracket, and you are trying to increase the rate. So you're not enhancing or you're not expanding that the number of businesses and items that are coming in. So if you ask me one thing that they have missed out in this budget, and to support your argument, we need to increase revenues, bring the threshold down, limit the exemptions to a bare minimum, ideally health and education.
Again, talking about these taxes, are the people burdened further as a result of these proposals? When on one end, President himself in his capacity as a finance minister said that this has targeted welfare program for the most vulnerable and those in need. But at the same time, the general public, people who stand affected as a result of this economic downturn, once again burdened by increased taxes. So how do we mitigate the challenges that people face?
Yes, let me explain this in detail. Now, in this budget speech, there's only one measure that is in relation to tax, which is certain. Now, it's Albert Einstein who said that in relation to taxation, there's nothing certain when it comes to tax. So, when we look at this budget proposal also, there is a proposal to increase VAT from 12 to 15. That will be coming by way of a gazette. So that is certain. But at the same time, there was a reference by the President to a set of proposals that was issued earlier, which he said that will be implemented accordingly. So there is nothing in relation to any further VAT proposals or in relation to income tax in this budget speech itself. Where do you find those additional proposals? It was basically, it was stated in a press release that was released by the media division of the Prime Minister at that time, which was not signed also. So there was no legal sanction. So we can see basically at that time the Commissioner General Inland Revenue refused to publish that in the website of the Inland Revenue Department. It did not appear in the website of the Finance Ministry also. So but we basically what we have done is after this budget speech, we have analyzed in detail those proposed that press release and included. But as I mentioned, there is no legal sanction for that. There is no certainty in relation to that. So what we have analyzed as income tax proposals, as detailed VAT proposals, whether which was stated in the that press release, whether that will be implemented or something else will come. We have to keep our fingers crossed to see when the bills are being published, right? So that's where to start. Now, with regard to the point that you made, is there a erosion of the base, tax base? Yes, what happened was in 2019, then the beginning of the 2020, both VAT base and the income tax base eroded, as Sujeewa rightly pointed out. What happened to VAT at that time? The threshold, registration threshold was 12 million for a year. That was increased to 300 million. Now, I don't know how many times multiplication, 300, 100%, 200%, no, much more than that, right? So, something unbelievable that happened at that time. And in addition to that, in relation to the income tax base, a person who had, let's say, tax-free threshold, or what you call the, not the exact technical term, if a person, a self-employed person had more than 5 lakhs only, the tax liability was there, 5 lakhs was the threshold. And in relation to a person in employment, in addition to that 5 lakhs, an employment relief of 7 lakhs was also given. So up to 1.2 million was the threshold. So that threshold also went up to 3 million there. So what happened was there was a number of taxpayers that was lost to the tax net at that time also. So there was a shrinking of the tax base, both income tax and the VAT. So in this document that I'm referring to, in that one there is a proposal to bring down the VAT threshold, which is at 300 million to 120 million. So like what Sujeewa has pointed out is, okay, that 120 million is also not sufficient. It should be further reduced, right? And in relation to the income tax, that 3 million is to be reduced to 1.8 million a year. So those are measures that we have been said that will be implemented to again broaden the tax base. So the anomaly here is, yes, we have always been telling Sri Lankan tax base should be increased so that we can achieve a lower tax rates. But then what happened in 2020 was totally contradictory. The base was basically eroded because of the policy measures at that time, and many taxpayers lost to the net. And the challenging thing is basically now how to rebuild that tax base. It's not going to be easy. But and that's going to make a lot of people unhappy also. The people who were given relief, now again you try to catch them into the tax net. In this ground situation, they are going to be very unhappy.
I think a massive accusation also to the previous regime was that VAT was reduced and there were too many handouts to the people. Again, Mr. Gajendran, now the President says this budget will lay the foundation going forward for the 2023 budget as a national policy, looking ahead to Sri Lanka as a more developed nation by 2048. But the question remains whether we today have enough room and space to breathe as a result of policies brought about by the government, and given the challenges and increasing prices of food and other commodities, and on the other hand the reforms that are expected by the IMF.
Basically what the budget has pronounced is you can see some sort of semblance of normalcy in 2025. It's on 2025 where the tax to GDP, revenue GDP will be about 15%, which is also low. Now we are at 7.8. It is in 2025 we are saying that we are going to achieve a primary account surplus of 2%. If we can achieve that and maintain it on a continuous basis, that will be a great achievement. We have never achieved, I think primary surplus is the total revenue less expenditure other than interest. So that is, they are saying 2%. They are saying the budget deficit, they are going to bring it down to 5%. These are all dream figures that we are dreaming of achieving. Public debt to be brought down to 100%. Don't forget this public debt was 80-90% very recently. It has gone to 100, 110, 120. Now they want to bring it by midterm 100%. They are trying to moderate inflation and interest rates and stabilize the exchange rate. Now, for this to happen, now government has two accounts: the external account, the domestic account. The domestic account is geared by the budget, revenue expenditure, basically like in your home, revenue expenditure. Now, if you see the revenue estimates for 2022, the revised one, it is only 2 trillion. That is after all these revenue proposals that have been pronounced in 31st of May by the Prime Minister's office, and that has been pronounced now. The rates have gone up. 2.2 billion was the 22 estimate when November 21 they budget, but it has come down to 2 trillion. So that shows the earlier one is fully exaggerated, and even with the revised one, we are not getting 2.2. But if you see the expenditure side, it is about, the recurrent expenditure was about 2.9 trillion, that is going up to 3.6 trillion. 600, 700 billion, it's going up, it's being increased. The main ministries which are going to consume that, the increased amount is, one is on energy, it's about 270 billion. Agriculture is about 115 billion. Education is 70 billion. And health is about 96 billion. And don't forget, even the defense is going up by 3 billion, right? Defense budget itself is another story, that's about 375 billion. So now, why reason this increase is because you are wanting to give safety net, and also because of inflation. Now, with all this, and the greatest challenge we have now, if we are going to survive with IMF, and I believe some good news are coming today, I don't know what is the extent of the agreement, debt sustainability. Debt sustainability means we have to go and demonstrate to IMF that we have the capacity and we are negotiate with our creditors to phase out the debts, restructure. 3 ways you can do it. One is to haircuts. Haircuts is you cut off part of the debts. Other one is you extend the term period. Third one is you can give increased rates. Now, if you go and tell the creditors, look here, we are in a mess, we want to pay you, like going to a bank, the bank won't use it. They will restructure for them to get whatever they are losing now, if at all, in the future. So you have to have the debt sustainability, so the rupee side and the dollar side. And in the dollar side, why there is a sort of a uneasy calm or normalcy now is, our imports is twice as much of exports, right? But now what have we done is we have curtailed exports. Now if you take the case of fuel, we are consuming, say 100%, 100 means we are, came down to 40%, now it's about 60%. We needed $500 million for a month. Now on the same basis we need 300 if it is 60%. But also the prices are coming down, so we might need less. So now like that, all items, either we are restricting, or we are consuming, or we are rationing, and we are now at the moment trying to match with the exports revenue with the imports. Don't forget, at the moment we have stopped paying our debts, other than multilateral debts. So that when that starts in, then the picture will be different. Basically, we are a bankrupt country, that's what it's saying. So now we have to, how do we come out of the mess? For me, two things have to be done. Shonky, fraudulent decisions has to stop. That has to start. The fish stings from the head. It has to start from the parliament, right? That is, the people say the parliament has lost credibility and it doesn't have mandate now. The second one is, you must have people who are able to make competent decision making. Adroitness should be at its best. If you don't achieve these two things immediately, and if you say this country cannot be reformed, this will go on like this, you can never change, then don't forget, people will have to suffer more. And when now they are saying by end of the year, half the population will become below the poverty line. The days that children at homes won't be able to eat, starving, then the parents, the reactions may be different.
That would be a grave situation. But again, 2022, beyond 2020 was an era that Sri Lankans were promised of hub status, South Asia's miracle. We've been having a vision to reach greatness in this region or even in South Asia. But today we're talking about 2048 when we are below rock bottom. Are we on the right path? I understand Mr. Gajendran has put out a set of areas that we've missed out, that we need to be worried about, but what is the right path? I mean, you all do calculations, so how do you calculate the way forward for us?
See, I think the important, just in a nutshell, why are we in this position, right? In my view, there are 4 key reasons. The politicians don't agree with these reasons, which I'm going to tell you, right? For me, the first one is rule of law and accountability. For me, that's one of the biggest issues we have, right? Number one. Number two is the populist policies and our entitlement culture. Politicians say, you bring us to power, you vote for us, I'll give you this free. They will go to a school, you don't have a swimming pool, I'll build a swimming pool for you. I'll give you a ground for you. Is there a budget allocation on that? No one even thinks about it, right? So that's number 2. Number 3 is the point that Gajen mentioned, is this historical issue of the twin deficits that we have run, right? The balance of payments and the budget deficit. So that includes our taxation policy, SOE reforms, subsidies given, the leakages, all that comes into those, that's why we are having these twin deficits. The other one is that we have not been able to separate governance from religion. And in my, that's a major issue. And that's one of the reasons where we are today. And that, in my view, has failed to bring the nation together. And without doing that, it's almost impossible. And we all know, in my view, there are only 2 times that we came together as a nation. Is in 1996, right? When Sanath and Aravinda from the south and Murali from the north, right, brought us the World Cup together with the rest of the members. And when Susantika won the silver medal, in Sydney in year 2000. So for me, these are 4 key reasons. But what would the politicians say? They'll say it's 74 years of legacy. I don't want to say Indeewari that Mahamanya D.S. Senanayaka is responsible for where we are today, but that's what the politicians will say. That's why John was also responsible for where we are today. So I don't want to go there, but that's general talk from the politicians. to go forward, right? For me, I think we should pay more taxes. I have no problem on that.
But is that something we need to talk about now when people are already suffering?
I agree. So that the issue comes in here. I have a condition on that. The condition is, if I am paying a rupee more of taxes, I want the government to cut down expenditure. See, if I am going to pay ₹1 million more, in my view, they should come and say, I'll cut down either 2 million or 3 million of expenditure. I think as Gajay mentioned, right, defense expenditure for me at the current allocation of 376 billion, right? Keep in mind, 376 billion. 13 years after the end of the conflict, for me, needs to be reviewed, right? But people will always say, look, there's national security, it cannot be threatened under any circumstance. I'm fully in agreement with that. But I was also told that the strength of our forces is actually bigger than the forces in Ukraine, who are fighting a battle right now. But our forces, our numbers are much larger. So we got to review this. See, our health and in my view, in the long term to get out of this, we got to invest in health and education. And our allocation for health and education is almost same together to what we are giving for defense on a yearly basis. Right? We allocate just over 200 billion for health and education. So that's where the issue is. So I think the current budget, I think that it has ticked off most of the requirements of IMF. And I think we should have done this even without IMF. Right? It's unfortunate that IMF needs to come here and put some pressure on us to get some of these reforms done. Long way to go. Maybe we'll talk about it during the next round.
Yes, in terms of monetary policy and fiscal management, I'd also like to ask you whether we are on the right path here. We've been talking about mistakes of the past, which brought us here today to where we are. And again, we are talking about decades ahead when we can have a brighter tomorrow. But in the now, today, what can we do to fix this?
Yeah, let me confine myself in relation to the tax policy, the formulation of the tax policy in the country and where we are now and why we are in this situation here. So to me, the major reason here is in the government, there are no people who understand tax properly, because tax is highly specialized area, so it's not something that everybody can understand. Number one is basically the formulation of, when you say the tax system, basically there are two areas. You have the tax policies and then the tax administration. So in Sri Lanka, both elements of the tax system are very weak. So this tax policy formulation, so many, how do you say, contradictory policies, etc. Why we see is because of the shortfall of the policy makers, the knowledge in relation to taxation. So the answer for that is basically, if you want to go forward in relation to the making proper tax policies, my prescription for that is there has to be a political independent national tax council, a national tax council. So this council will consist of people who understand taxation and maybe some business people as well. But this all the tax policy will be formulated by this National Tax Council, not by the politicians there. Because what is happening in Sri Lanka is how the tax policies are being formulated is because of the lobby groups reaching the incumbent finance minister from time to time and basically patching the tax system. So that is where that is why basically from 1932, from the introduction of the income tax ordinance, we have come to this situation. So now I always keep comparing this with how the road system in Colombo has evolved. When we want to go from one place to another destination, what we do is we somehow create a road to go from that point to the other point. We don't look at the entire picture in designing the road system. So that's why Colombo, the road system is like this. That's why so much traffic that is there. The same way we have been basically introducing tax policy. Whenever there's a shortfall to the government in relation to taxes, we introduce a tax and we put a label and try to collect taxes, which is wrong. So there has to be a national tax committee or council or body or whatever that will formulate short-term policies and the long-term policies, so that it will, irrespective of the change of the government, it will continue. Now, I'll tell you one of the big policy contradictions that we find in Sri Lanka. In 1998, Sri Lanka decided to abandon the concept of taxing the turnover and go to the concept of taxation of the value addition. So that's why we had that then GST, which was renamed as VAT in 2002, right? But from 2002 itself, basically, we found basically other tax statutes coming into place to tax the turnover, like National Security Levy, Defence Levy, NBT, and now what we call the Social Security Contribution Levy. So what is this? This is basically a taxation of the turnover. All the tax people agree that taxation of the turnover is not the correct way of collecting the indirect taxation, because that promotes cascading effect. The method of collecting the indirect taxes correctly is basically the taxation of the value addition. So what we have in Sri Lanka today is a hybrid system. We are taxing the turnover and we are taxing the value addition also. So nowhere in the world, I think, we have a system of this nature here.
I'd also, since we do have tax experts, accountants, chartered accountants, and an attorney at law here, I'd also like to talk about the state-owned enterprises when we return after this short break. Do stay with us at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24. Welcome back. You're joining us at Hyde Park, and we are in discussion on the interim budget presented in Parliament recently and the way forward for Sri Lanka. We have with us, joining us tonight, Mr. N.R.Gajendran, Mr. Sujeewa Mudalige and Mr. Suresh Perera, all of whom are experts in tax. And so let's talk about reviving state-owned enterprises. I think there is a lot of focus now where Sri Lankan Airlines, there's the 49% stake in catering, Sri Lankan catering, and ground handling is on offer. At the same time, there is more emphasis by the Ranil Wickremesinghe-led government to revive these state-owned enterprises. But how do we do this? You all have transformed corporates. You all are running successful establishments. So how do we transform and transcend this into our state sector as well? I open the floor so that we cut down on time spent on my questions.
State-owned enterprises, we call it SOE. They are the SOBs of the country. When I say SOBs, it's sons of blessings of the country, not the SOB you are thinking of, right? Sons of blessing. You do anything, those institutions will continue to run at a deficit. And when it's running at a deficit, who is paying for it? Parliamentarians are not paying. People are paying. And when people can't pay, country can't pay, we default, right? So there is no more talk of state-owned enterprises to be run at a deficit. That means already it has been pronounced, it will be all cost-reflective pricing. That is, your price should at least cover the cost of supply. Now don't forget, when you do this, there are vulnerable segment of the society will be badly affected. When it comes to airlines, they are not affected at all, right? But when it comes to power, energy, fuel, petrol, the lesser privileged people who rightfully have a minimum expectation to enjoy a legitimate right in life, they have to be safeguarded. Even the IMF is saying vulnerable society has to be safeguarded. Now in that case, you have to have selective, either you must have targeted funding and targeted relief, or if you take in the case of a petrol or diesel, why should a guy going in the BMW and a guy going in a three-wheeler or a motorcycle pay the same price? So now you have to have a creative system to bring that balance there. Why should, when you go to government schools, why should a person who is below the poverty line, the parents, sending a school, don't forget education is birthright of a child. It is birthright. There is no, if you can't, government can't provide that education and health, no government is worthy of it being, so it has to be provided. There is, you can say entitlement culture, all that, but it's their birthright. Your child and my child should be given the same opportunities, and one child, because he is born affluent, shouldn't have great opportunities when it comes to nutrition, health, education, and basic living entitlement. So now when it comes there, why should Sujeewa Mudalige's child and a guy on the road's child go to the same school, not pay fees? He must pay fees for about 10, 20 people, children, right? That child must have free, right? So that type of a selective, and when it comes to taxes also, true, this populist culture has to go, that politicians have created. Entitlement culture has to go, but that doesn't mean people have to pay for all their provisions. The people who can't afford it, like now even the taxes, as I'm always repeatedly saying, it has to be on the principle of capacity to pay. Now if you have indirect taxes, VAT, it is regressive in nature. The marginal propensity to consume is affected when the tax price goes up. Given goods, basic goods, has to go free of tax. He mentioned about health and education. But there are basic goods for human nutrition, parents' nutrition, children nutrition, has to go free of tax. That doesn't mean people who can afford, there have to be a scheme. Now if you see even the vehicle, the fuel matter, now because of this QR system, the rationing is well managed. So it's a creative system which should have been done initially. We wouldn't have these queues, right? If they said, okay, we are going to give you only 10 liters of 15 liters, 20 liters, of course this is still not enough. So like that you have to create a system, because technology is available now for them, where these people have to be, you can't keep increasing indirect tax and not expect social uprising and unrest. Because when you increase indirect taxes, still we are getting over 80% of our revenue from indirect taxes, that is consumption. When you consume, easy to tax, you are paying tax, right? And if basic essentials are consumed, you know, income tax, corporates, if you see, there are corporates with all, under this difficult setup, if you see the most of the published information, don't you see the profits have doubled, tripled, quadrupled in most of these large corporations? There are reasons that is happening. That is because of exports. People who are in export, their incomes have doubled because of the appreciation or depreciation of the rupee. Then if you are in the tea sector, you are benefited because there again there is benefits the tea. Then if you see in the people who are in the production sector, you know, they are, because the imports are there, their products are moving, profits have grown phenomenally, disproportionately. And also you have every other, now small businesses are getting shunned away. So all the businesses are moving into larger business. So guys who had, even my example of the value of money, the legislated tax and unlegislated tax, if you do, there are possibility for a large corporates, in absolute terms, the profits to be 3, 4, 5 times there, then why shouldn't they pay higher tax? Now if you be saying, the people won't like that. Corporates, there will be a lobby, as he said, there will be a lobby. Principle of capacity to pay. Who has the highest capacity to pay has to come in. And basically the people, less privileged people, the marginalized people, vulnerable segment of the society has to be looked after. Otherwise you won't be able to go in your vehicle. Don't forget that. You won't be able to go on your bicycle. You know, people don't have food, right? So we have come to that. Food security is an issue. And don't forget, one of the means of going forward is IMF. The second one is UN for food security. We are going to get relief from UN for food security. So if these politicians don't realize, because they are in a different world, they are in a cuckoo land, they live in a totally different world, they are not, though they talk of reality, none of them have experienced reality. They get any amount of fuel they want, they get any amount of food they want, medicine want, and they have it, right? You and I might not have that, but they have it. So all this has to change. That was the demand of the Aragali and the people's movement. So that has to understood clearly.
I'd like to ask about, again, the state-owned enterprises, the SOEs, and the corporates, the private sectors which keep the economy running. How affected are they, or how much more can they contribute?
Yeah, so on the SOEs, I think you must give credit to President Wickremesinghe, because this is not something that was there that we saw over the last couple of years. So the biggest question in Indeewari for me is whether the previous MPs who are not supportive of these reforms will now support, because the president has changed, but it's the same MPs who are supporting, right? So for example, if you were to, reforming or restructuring of Bank of Sri Lanka and People's Bank, a year ago would have been a no-go area. But today, President Wickremesinghe is saying, I want to do this. So you must give credit to President Wickremesinghe. It's a very bold statement to make. I think it's the right thing to do, but we have been talking about this for at least for the last 20 to 30 years. See, the SOE reforms, in the very, there's a couple of fundamental issues. The reason is we have 500 plus. Some are saying it can be even much higher than that, right? I'm not sure whether anyone knows exactly the number. That's in the first point. And there are different legal structures. Say, for example, if you take the CTB, it's a board. Water is a board. Petroleum is a corporation. Railway is a department. Sri Lankan is under the Companies Act. So we have multiple structures and ownership structures. If you take the plantation company, there's a golden shareholder. The Bank of Sri Lanka People's Bank is a different structure. So all this to be done, it's the right thing to do. We need to do that. I wouldn't want to be paying higher taxes because either CPC or CEB or water board is bleeding or railways is bleeding, right? But the problem is this. When you say it's cost reflective pricing, it also takes into account the inefficiencies. Then why should I pay for it? If those can be run efficiently, they should be run efficiently, and then you must look at the cost that is required to run it efficiently. But they're inefficient, and then I'm expected to pay for that. Then I'm not willing to do that. So the second point is, I think we need to look at what happened to the telecom sector. Now, telecom was under a department. It was a department of telecommunications 20 years ago. See what has happened today. Why? Because we brought in capital investment. It's a very just like your industry here, right? It's very capital intensive, and we brought competition, right? And look at the service what we are getting today. The service by the telcos here is as good as anything what you would get in any part of this world. Pricing is very comparative. So, and government is a regulator. So that is the ideal model. Yeah. Government plays that regulatory part. You bring multinationals, local companies into the sector, make them compete, the value of the product and the service goes up, and the consumer benefits. So if I ask the same thing, it can be done on so many sectors. It can be, say, electricity board. The unions have been against what we call unbundling. Generation, transmission, distribution. It has to be unbundled. Without unbundling, CB has no future. And you and I will be paying 30 rupees, 40 rupees, 100 rupees a unit. And the unions will be completely against this. So we need a minister and a head of state who will take this through. And you need people who can support this reform process, because you have to do valuations, you have to look at the ownership structures, you have to look at regulation, you have to make sure, end of the day, the consumer is benefits as well, right? So it's a 80-20 rule. In my view, if you can tackle the big 10, right, what we call the monsters, and we know these 10 monsters, they sort of incur 90% of the losses what we are talking about. If we tackle those 10, and we can tackle the rest later on, but it's so that's why again I said credit to the finance minister for at least bringing it onto the table for discussion, but implementation is key, and historically we have been extremely poor in implementation. We talk a lot, but we don't get the job done.
You might have something to add to this, and I'd also like you to decode the defense budgets to education and other sectors.
Yeah, with regard to the SOEs, I think there was a right message in the budget speech. That is basically government should not be doing business. Government should be making policies. The government should be acting as the regulator. So I think there is a common understanding, a common acceptance that should be the case even across the political spectrum also, right? But like Sujeewa pointed out, now when you are trying to achieve that status, how do you get out of this, get rid of, or how do you transfer these government-owned business undertakings into the private sector? How do you transfer that? So that process has to be handled very smoothly, efficiently, transparent. I think transparency is a key there. And also this involves handling the people, the trade unions. So there has to be skill in handling that process correctly. But it has to happen, yes, I do agree there, right? But with regard to the Sri Lankan Airlines, I think we do have a history, just because that it's appeared in the budget speech to say that 49% will be given to the private sector or to an investor. Whether that privatization could be carried out that easily, we have to wait and see, because of the amount of the debt that is there in the Sri Lankan Airlines right now. This process of privatization, if I use the word, it's a dirty word, but it's the privatization of the Sri Lankan Airlines. I think many attempts were done many years back also, and there was no success in relation to that. So even in this juncture, I don't know whether it's easy to make a statement. Yes, basically we need to find an investor and give it to the government should come out of this, or basically just keep the 50% and find an investor. But whether there are investors coming forward to step into those shoes is basically something that we will have to wait and see.
Right. I think we are in the final few minutes of the discussion, so I'd like to understand maybe going forward what this means for corporates. Is there sufficient room for the private sector to function, and are we creating an environment where the private sector will thrive and the economy will develop? I open this to
when you say private sector, you know, it includes the SMEs, and also there are daily wage earners who don't rely on the government, and self-employed people. Now the daily wage earners and the self-employed people are about 4 million in number, they say. Over 50–55% of the businesses is SMEs, micro SMEs, and the economy that they contribute is about 70–80%. So the large corporates in that sense, if you see the listed companies, there are about 200 or 250 companies, and effectively operating is about 180–190 companies. But end of the day, the focus is given because on the large corporates, because they have the power of influence. Their voice can be heard. But here again, a policy has to be made. If you are from a fiscal point of view, if you are going to tax whoever it may be, if you are not going to accept the principle of capacity to pay, you are going to be having a problem. And we had this surcharge tax or super gain tax over a certain amount, they were taxed higher rates. Every time they are saying you have to tax minimum. But then maybe we have to see whether that's going, because about 125 billion, 150 billion comes from that, you know, whether we can lose that. But at the same time, from the private sector point of view, you mustn't create an anti-business culture, anti-tax culture for private sector. True, this exemptions is becoming a taboo word, because the exemptions are given, long-term exemptions are given. Some of the exemption given for some companies exceeded their lifespan of the company or the project. So long. Now, if you see the port cities, indefinite exemption. What is the contribution to the country? But there are value drivers for the business, for which you must recognize relief for tax, a claim for tax more than the legal expenditure. Like in the case of training, retraining, you know, like in the case of improving your business process, product process, R&D. Now even for businesses, small businesses or large businesses, for them to survive in this current environment, there are so many challenges where they have to re-engineer their business process, re-engineer their product process, production process. So all those things where you are investing money, you have to, because if on an investment you can give relief, because investment is one of the key components of calculating GDP. Exports, imports, public demand, public consumption, and investments. So you have to recognize that. Maybe this budget has not recognized, but for the 23 budget in November, true, you tax. But again, as Sujeewa said, don't tax for your corruption and don't tax for your inefficiency. You can tax to give relief to the vulnerable people. You can follow the trickle-down system or redistribution system. Trickle-down system may not work. The redistribution system in this country to work, it has to be corrupt-free, right? So corruption is the root cause for this country's collapse, to my mind.
Yeah, so quick point from a corporate's point of view, at the moment, they are finding it really difficult. The reason is they have to borrow at 30%. So Indeewari, if you are to run your business here, borrowing at 30%, and to keep that kind of margin is almost impossible. So the interest rates, in my view, has to come down. And I hope gradually it will start coming down, and because the current rates are not sustainable, right? As I told you yesterday, the 1-year treasury bill is at 30%, right? So if you don't get 30% on your deposit in Indeewari, you are being played out by the financial institution. So corporates, for them to do business, you need to make funding available. And right now, the banking sector, it's not just there's a shortage of dollars, there's a shortage of rupees within the banking system. So it's extremely difficult to get their financing. So that is one of the biggest issues that the corporates are facing at the moment. But one other message to the corporates is that all of us, we need to have an outward focus now. We need to see where can we earn dollars. I mean, my own firm, as a professional services firm, the days are gone where we can just do billings in rupees only. We have to look at opportunities. How can I service clients who are overseas? How can I, bill $100? So that needs to be there. And I don't think if we had this focus 20 years ago, I think we wouldn't be in this position today. Because most of the corporates are inward looking. They'll try to import something, sell it here. I mean, that type of business definitely is not sustainable. My other issue is actually because there will be a downturn. As you know, we have archaic labor laws. It's extremely difficult, right, to do anything with your labor force. So that is definitely going to impact the corporates. But I'm glad that during President Vikram Singh's speech, he was also talking about certain new legislation to be brought in, and I think that's a step in the right direction.
Right, we have just about 2 minutes.
Yes, I think with regard to the corporates also, if I make a prediction, the same way this is going to affect the individuals, they will also get affected. No, in case of the individuals, what I predict is in this economic environment is the richer will get rich, the poor and the weak are going to get affected, and basically the mid-tier is going to disappear. Mid-tier is going to get thin in Sri Lanka society. Same thing is going to happen in the corporate sector also. Like Mr. Gajendran rightly pointed out, we are going to see the big companies are going to thrive in this environment, whereas the SME sector is going to suffer, and they are going to get eliminated or basically suffer a lot, and they are going to get weaker because of this economic environment. Now, in relation to the big companies, as somebody pointed out, there are voices to speak on their behalf. Whereas in relation to the SMEs, their voice is unheard. I think Mr. Gajendran pointed out it correctly. So because of that, my prediction is what is going to happen in the Sri Lankan society in case of the individuals, society, as well as the corporate sector, is there's going to be a big gap between the big companies and the smaller companies. The profits or the business elements that are there in the SME sector is also will get shifted to the big companies, and their profits will they will thrive basically in this environment. That is what I expect that is going to happen in Sri Lanka. However much we speak, I don't think that will change.
So tax them more.
But I mean, is this really the way forward for us? More and more taxes?
No, so basically yes, right now it's a
Selective taxes.
yeah, basically first
We are an unequal society. We have to have an unequal form of tax.
see, I won't jump into talking about the taxes, how to tax. I would say the starting point is creating the National Tax Council. So there's a set of people who will decide, who will evaluate properly and come up with the policy making. Our problem in our tax system is we don't have that policy making body. You can't basically tinker the tax system once in a while.
We
and
make
then
ad hoc
do that thing.
decisions.
Ad
There
hoc
is no
decisions, yes.
research team. There is no permanent team to look into and study and analyze. And in fact, and now with technology, you can get so much of information.
See,
But we haven't had policy consistency.
Consistency is the biggest issue, and that's what investors are looking for. Whatever the rate, give us consistent policy. So when I come and invest, I'm investing for 10, 15, 20 years. You can't come every year and keep changing the tax policy. One day you're saying, no, we are not taxing you on, there are no turnover-based taxes. Then you come and say, no, we are putting turnover-based taxes. You are making too much money, so there'll be, super taxes being brought in. Completely unacceptable.
See, during 2013-2014 era, Sri Lankan policymakers made a decision, no more tax holidays. Under the BOI, tax holidays were not granted.
Right.
And that same thing was embedded into the New England Revenue Act also, no tax holidays. But then from 2020 onwards, again the concept of tax holidays have come into the system. And interesting thing is under the same set of officers, the same set of officers who decided 2015 that tax holidays should not be the way forward. That was the
It's
revised. So what
sad
is the
that
basics?
on these very shows we talk about why we require policy consistency and how expert panels as you have being featured to talk about policy consistency. But let's hope for a brighter, better and a more equitable future for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Suresh Perera, Principal Regulatory for KPMG in Sri Lanka, as well as Mr. Sujeewa Mudalige, Partner for PwC in Sri Lanka, as well as Mr. N.R.Gajendran, Senior Partner for Gajma and Company, joining us here at Hydepark on AdaDerana 24. We've been talking about the budget and the way forward. We will return with more episodes of how we can decode the budget and these financial aspects that we do not understand. We'll take a look at the rest of the schedule for you on AdaDerana 24. Thanks for watching. Good night.